Hear ye, hear ye. The following scene is a reenactment of Perry vs. Schwarzenegger, the Proposition 8 trial heard in U.S. District Court. Dr. George Chauncey, professor of history at Yale University, is the plaintiff's expert witness on the history of discrimination. He is under direct examination by the plaintiff's intervenor's attorney, Teresa Stewart. The plaintiffs in this case are two loving same-sex couples who simply want to marry, just as any heterosexual couple in America has the right to do. Court is now in session.
I wonder if you could describe the discrimination or give some examples of the discrimination that has been perpetrated on gay people.
Right. I was going to discuss discrimination in public accommodations and employment.
Start with public accommodations.
Probably one of the most important instances of this was the fact that in 1933, with the repeal of Prohibition, first New York State and then successively many other states issued regulations that prohibited bars or restaurants, cabarets, or any place with a liquor license from serving drinks to lesbians or gay men or allowing them to congregate on the premises. And this, of course, just had a profound impact on lesbian and gay sociability for lesbians and gay men, as well as for heterosexuals. Bars and restaurants were places to go to meet your friends, to socialize, but they were particularly important for lesbians and gay men because they had to be so careful to hide their gay identities in so many of the social settings, at the workplace, often with their biological families and so forth, so that they were really keen to find places where they could go and be more open, just socialize with people of their own kind. And what that meant was that this criminalization meant that, A, when people went to a regular bar or restaurant, a normal bar or restaurant, they typically had to be very careful to hide the fact that they were gay, for fear of being excluded. And so they often sought out places that had decided that they could make money with this snitch market, would pay higher prices for drinks. So there were so few places where they could go and be open. But those places, to survive, had to pay bribes to the police, or often to organized criminal syndicates which had relationships with the police, or were even run by organized criminal syndicates. So it meant that gay life was just enmeshed in a web of criminality because of the criminalization of gay and lesbian sociability.
Did any of the bars sort of explicitly exclude people in light of the law? And how did they do that?
Well, they did it in a range of ways. Certainly, bartenders in a normal bar, quote unquote, if they realized that someone was gay, could simply 86 them, as they put it, refuse to serve them a drink, tell them they are 86th. They had to leave the bar, which would be quite embarrassing. I have interviewed people who have had that experience in front of their friends and found it really humiliating. But then, in the lesbian and gay bars themselves, particularly, well, actually, not just in those, in bars in neighborhoods with a gay reputation, bar owners sometimes put a sign over the bar itself that would say, I've heard various signs described and seen them in the literature, if you are gay, please stay away, or it is against the law to serve homosexuals. Please do not ask us to serve homosexuals. And so this conveyed a very clear message to both gay and straight customers that homosexuals were a despised category to be excluded. And they were also part of the way the bars tried to protect themselves from the police. to show that they were being vigilant to exclude gay people.
So how did the authorities enforce those laws?
Well, the beauty of the liquor licensing and the licensing system was that it meant that a small business owner who ran a bar had to get a license to sell, or a restaurant, cabaret, had to get a license to sell liquor, and had to enforce the regulations imposed by whatever the liquor authority was, and knew that he or she always risked losing that license and really losing that investment if the liquor authority realized they were not enforcing those regulations. So first of all, the licensing system itself meant that every single bar had a staff that was trying to make sure the bar wouldn't get in trouble. But secondly, local patrolmen could step in periodically, would sort of look in, see what was happening in your place, make sure it wasn't disorderly. And then the liquor authorities themselves had a staff of special investigators who would go undercover into restaurants and bars and so forth to just make sure that a range of regulations were being followed, including the prohibition against serving homosexuals. They then, if they saw them, would report this, and this could lead to the closure of the place.
Did other authorities besides the police, the local police, or the liquor authorities get involved in the policing effort?
Well, bars that were close to military bases, certainly in the big cities during the war, were also put under surveillance by sort of coalition task force of military officials and police officials, because the military was quite keen to make sure that its sailors and soldiers weren't going to such places. So they joined with the police in investigating them, had their off-limits list, tried to get places closed so other forces were brought in.
So if you were a police officer and you were enforcing this effort, or a military person, how did you know the bar was serving gay people?
Well, it's a good question. There were two major techniques used. One was to record, take note of an act of one man picking up another man, and it was usually a man in this case, since that was a sure sign that homosexuals were there. So what the police and the liquor authority agents did, often, was to send plainclothes policemen into the bars who would strike up conversations with customers, lead them on, and then, at some point, when an invitation was issued to leave the bar and go home, bring out the handcuffs and arrest them. So that would lead to the arrest of the bar goer, and they would also be the best proof possible that homosexuals were at the bar. And so it would then be reported, and that would lead to proceedings to revoke the liquor license. The other way that was used, and I've seen this in a bunch of court records, where a bar has resisted, has tried to challenge the revocation of its license. The police would actually point to stereotypical gender behavior or cross-gender behavior that was associated with lesbians and gay men, and use that as evidence that a bar was patronized by them. So, for instance, a policewoman might report that she had seen two women dancing together, or women with short hair, or women who were wearing some articles of masculine clothing, or women who seemed to swagger around a bar in a way that was more masculine than a woman would walk. Or likewise, they would point to men whose clothing was just a little too unconventional, a little too colorful, whose hair was too long, who addressed each other in effeminate ways. The most startling example to me was sort of one of the signs a police officer gave that a bar was gay was that he had overheard two men talking about the opera, something that no real man would do in the 1950s.